Chairman Hall, we're ready to begin when you are.
Thank you, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the board is a hybrid physical virtual meeting. I'd like to welcome those in the boardroom with me today and those that are attending virtually. While keeping your microphone muted, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time, I will ask the Secretary to the board to address a few technical and protocol items.
We have a quorum. The full board is present for this meeting. Chairman Hall and Board Member Smith. Please ensure that you have silenced any mobile devices you have with you. The virtual portion of this hybrid meeting is on Cisco WebEx. We have two OIT staff, Ben Rana and Victor Amaya, monitoring and managing the meeting. They will be locking this meeting and no new connections will be allowed. OIT will be advancing the slides, so you will hear presenters say, "Next slide." If you lose connectivity in this meeting, please contact Victor Amaya. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded. The video recording of the open portion of this meeting will be posted for public viewing for a limited period of time. Chairman Hall, that concludes the technical and protocol items. We're ready to continue when you are.
The Secretary will now read an opening statement on the government and the Sunshine Act.
This is an open Farm Credit Administration board meeting under the Government and the Sunshine Act. If anyone raises a subject that may be discussed in closed session as permitted by the Government and the Sunshine Act, Chairman Hall will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
We will now review the published meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as published?
There is. I move to adopt the agenda as published.
I second the motion. The motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, the Secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. Next, we will consider whether any portions of the meeting should be closed to the public.
The agenda does not include items that we should properly discuss in closed session. I move that the entire meeting remain open.
Second the motion. The motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, the Secretary will record the vote on this motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. Please turn to tab 1, and that will be the next item on our agenda, which is approval of the minutes as presented behind tab 1.
I move to approve the minutes for the March 12, 2026 regular board meeting as presented.
I second the motion. Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, the Secretary will record the vote on the motion.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. Please turn to tab 2, and at this time, I will ask Rebecca Kaiser and John Stevens to present quarterly report on economic conditions and system condition and performance. This is an information item.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Hall, Board Member Smith. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm here to talk on the quarterly report on economic conditions. With me is John Stevens from the Office of Examination, who will be doing OE's portion of the presentation on system conditions and performance. I'm starting off with a quick outline of what I want to go over this morning. I want to first start talking about some macroeconomic updates, some indicators that we're looking at and what we're seeing there in the general macroeconomy before turning to farm income and getting into crop margins as well as livestock profitability. Then I will turn it over to John. Next slide, please. To start things off, just going over a couple of macro indicators, really showing some potential challenges ahead. The first is PCE inflation. We've seen some recent stability with PCE inflation right around that 3% level. And earlier this morning, it did come in. Core PCE is down to 3%. The issue with that, even though it is stable, is that it's still high. It's at 3% rather than the 2% we would like to see it at, that the Fed would like to see it at as well. There's also a chance that this general price levels will be tested with the recent volatility in energy markets. Also, unemployment rate has been slowly creeping up for the past 3 years. It's still at a relatively low level, right at about 4.3%. We've seen some swings in the monthly jobs reports with February jobs coming in low and March jobs coming in high. A lot of this has to do with differences in different sectors, with the healthcare services leading the gains in job growth, and federal government leading with the most losses year over year for jobs. The labor force participation rate has also been declining steadily. In this kind of situation where unemployment is relatively steady for the past couple years, but there's a lot of tension. I've seen it described, and I like to describe it as a low hire and low fire environment. Another measure that we're looking at is real GDP. For the fourth quarter of 2025, real GDP growth came in at 0.7%. This was, I guess, helped along by strong growth in the third quarter of 2025, which put real GDP growth for 2025 year as a whole at about 2.1%. That number was a little bit lower in the fourth quarter just due to the prolonged government shutdown, reduced exports as well. Right now, the federal funds rate has been paused. Right now, we're thinking maybe there will be one change, possibly a rate cut coming on later in 2026, but the possibility for a rate hike has not been excluded. We'll also see that this could be kind of shaken up or changed depending on the new Fed chairman whenever that person comes into office later this year. Next slide. One special topic here, just looking at the historical perspective on government debt. Now, this graph goes back 20 years, just to kind of give us a snapshot, goes back to 2005. And you can see there in that black line, that is the national debt to GDP ratio. You can see it increased pretty sharply during the times of recessions in 2008, 2009, as well as in 2020. Other than that, we saw a period of relative stability of that ratio where the debt was growing at a comparable rate to how GDP was growing. Now that level is right at about 122% now. That red line shows the interest payments on debt to GDP. We can see that was kind of stable, almost at a downward trend. And then in about 2021, 22, with the increase in interest rates, that rose sharply up to 4%. Interest payments on debt are now the third largest line item of government spending, only surpassed by Medicare and Social Security. Right now, also not shown on the graph, but private debt as a percentage of GDP has been declining for the past 5 years, mostly due to the increase in interest rates. The worry about increased government debt is the possibility for that increased government debt to crowd out private debt and private credit. We see that one study estimated that for every dollar of additional deficit spending, it crowds out 33 cents of private investment, mostly through increased interest rates because of a higher demand for loanable funds. Next slide. Moving on to more of the farm economy, I want to start talking about farm income and the projections for 2026. The graph on the left shows real cash receipts for animal-to-animal products, as well as crops, and then the black dotted line is net cash farm income. For 2026, animal and animal products cash receipts in real terms are expected to decline, while they're still expected to be at high levels. Crop cash receipts, are expected to decline just marginally. However, if you look at that dotted line, net cash farm income is expected to rise, stay about the same level. And most of that is because that net cash farm income is being kind of propped up by direct government payments this year. So in the graph on the right, we can see government payments in a couple different categories. The green bars at the very bottom are those commodity price-based programs, ARC and PLC, which is expected to see a $13 billion increase in 2026. The orange bars are the supplemental and ad hoc disaster assistance programs, and specifically the non-pandemic assistance. You can see that's also pretty high for this next year. Part of that is going to be the farmer bridge assistance payments, which were authorized for $12 billion, and already about $9 billion of that has been distributed to farmers. And some of that is also coming from payments from supplemental disaster relief programs that was authorized in previous years and is now just kind of being paid out in 2026 as well. Next slide. It wouldn't be springtime and planting season if I didn't talk about weather. So I want to talk a little bit about what our country's looking like for drought situation. About a fifth of the country right now is in no drought whatsoever. And then for D2 to D4, it's 35% in that area. And many areas are actually expected to improve. So you can see in the graph that green and beigeish gray color is where it's expected to end or improve. So we see, good signs over in the Mid-Atlantic, the East Coast, as well as the Corn Belt. However, we did see the warmest and driest winter on record for the West. We could see that drought in the West is expected to persist as well as develop. The good news is that most reservoirs, especially in California, water levels are at an okay level. We're not seeing any critical availability currently, but snowpack acts as a reservoir for water, and as it slowly melts over the summer, it provides us with water throughout the year. With very, very low snowpack records, especially in my home state of Colorado, there is the potential that we'll see critical water availability issues later on in the year. With this, planting intentions were shown that farmers are intending to plant more soybeans compared to last year, and fewer corn acres compared to last year, with soybean acres intentions at about 85 million acres and corn acres at about 95 million acres. Also, intentions for wheat planting show that this will be the lowest wheat acres on record since those records began in 1919. And I think that really speaks to those drought conditions in the West, as well as prolonged stress, prolonged dry conditions in the West. Next slide, please. So I was talking about planting intentions and seeing more more soybean acres compared to last year and fewer corn acres. And I think that one of the big things driving that is the expected returns for soybeans versus corn. So Illinois crop budgets in January showed high returns to beans, and that was mostly due to input prices, lower fertilizer costs, even in January. This showed up in the planting intentions for higher soybean acres. In the left graph, we can see ending stocks for corn and soybeans. Corn in the yellow, you can see for 2026 is expected to be pretty high. Soybeans, it's expected to be a little bit higher than last year. However, stocks to use ratio for corn for this marketing year is expected to be right around 13%, higher than, when we saw lows of 2022 and 23, but still below some historical highs that we've seen. We've seen strong use of corn this past year, mostly with feed, cheap feed for livestock. It's corn use, as well as slightly increased for ethanol demand this year. On the right-hand side of the graph, these are futures price changes for corn and soybeans, changed from January 2023. So you can see that prices are much lower now. But if you kind of track back from the right-hand side of that graph, in the yellow line, that's corn prices. You can tell we're right about where we were last year. And soybean prices, we're actually above where we were last year. There's been some price rallies late into 2026, especially with soybeans. A lot of that, I think, came from China buying soybeans and increasing their commitments of soybeans. And a lot of producers were able to sell their new crop. And we saw this come with the quarterly stocks report, which showed that between ending stocks of last marketing year and the first quarter of this marketing year, that soybean farmers really aggressively marketed their soybeans. However, corn was the opposite, and it was held on to. I think a lot of those producers are kind of hoping for a little bit better price. Next slide, please. I'm now working my way into input prices, specifically energy markets and how that's being affected right now with conflict in the Middle East. Energy markets have been sharply higher since the bombings in Iran started in late February. Yesterday, they did drop quite a bit with the news of the ceasefire. This morning, they are back up to crude oil's back up to about $100. At one point, West Texas Intermediate crude oil prices were over $1.15 a barrel. And you could see that in the top of the graph, that sharp spike at the very end. That represents an over 50% increase just in about a month. About 25% or a quarter of the world's seaborne oil trade and about 20% of LNG or liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is why we're seeing these supply shocks throughout the world. The U.S. is a little bit more insulated as we get, our oil and fertilizer mostly from different areas. We don't rely on the Middle East as much for that, but it is kind of shaking up global markets, causing those price disruptions. Diesel prices, as well as major farm inputs, including nitrogen fertilizers, follow the prices of crude oil, or they track them pretty closely. So we can see in the bottom graph the prices for anhydrous ammonia and urea, and that spike that came in March. Somewhere between about 60 to 80% of farmers have already locked in their fertilizer prices for this year. I think they bought mostly last fall when prices were still lower. So we do have the good majority of farmers that are not going to be paying these high prices. Farmers with any unhedged inputs will be seeing, more of an increase in price, especially with, nitrogen fertilizers as well as diesel. It's kind of hard to use less diesel when you're going into planting season, but there's always a chance that we might see lower applications of nitrogen fertilizer just as producers respond to that price increase. Next slide, please. Moving on to livestock, chicken profitability has been very positive lately for about the past 2 years, riding on high prices as well as low feed costs. There was a lot of excitement for chicken last year with a lot of fast food places putting chicken on their menu and features, including Taco Bell, who typically does not have any chicken on their menu. That excitement didn't quite last through the year. And so we're seeing prices kind of come back down late in 2026. The graph shows chicken processor profitability, and you can see it was pretty strong for about 2 years. It's come back down now as we see lower prices, but it is estimated to be about 10 cents per pound for 2026. Processors are responding to these lower prices and lower profit margins by placing fewer pullets. Q4 of 2025, placements of pullets were down 3% compared to 2024. So we'll see if later in 2026, we'll see a tighter supply of chicken because of that. Also, highly pathogenic avian influenza cases are down compared to 2025, which is good news. And the cases that have been popping up are mostly in turkeys, which have caused turkey prices to increase. And we've also seen a couple of cases in egg layers, but egg prices are still relatively low, especially compared to where we saw them last year. Next slide, please. Now, staying on with livestock and my favorite topic, I'll talk about cattle markets here. We've seen very low inventories for the cattle herd, coming in at about 86.2 million head at January 1st, which is the lowest in 75 years. This has really been driving high prices for calves. And most of those big margins are being captured by cow-calf producers who last year are expected in 2026 to see profit margins of over $1,100 per head. Now, the domestic herd size is not the only supply factor that is causing these shocks. Imports of live cattle from Mexico are still restricted over fears on New World screwworm. We're also seeing drought and dry conditions in the West that is really making it difficult to hold on to cattle. We're also seeing large fires in Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma that are really challenging our cattle producers there. This graph on the right shows cattle on feed inventory. The red line is the start of 2026 compared to 2025 in the dotted line, and the average of 2020 through 2024 in that solid black line. You can see we started the year at a much lower level of inventory of cattle on feed, and we've since kind of climbed back up to where we were in 2025. And the big thing with this is over the past couple months, we've seen higher placements, so more calves being put into feedlots with fewer marketing, so less calves leaving feedlots. At this point, those feedlot producers are able to access cheap feed and keep those calves on feed as long as they can, and really grow them. And so that's why the flow of cows or calves through feedlots has slowed down quite a bit. Feeder margins for 2026 are expected to be about $370 per head, but are expected to fall back down substantially closer to break even in the next year, as they have to pay higher prices for their feeder calves. Next slide, please. To wrap things up here, I want to talk about a couple of challenges and opportunities as well for the farm economy. And the first thing is that producer confidence is pretty low. A lot of producers surveyed are saying that they see that they're in worse shape than they were last year. And the outlook for next year is also not great in their minds. Farmer bridge assistance payments that are going out now are meant to help farmers. And I think a lot of them surveyed said that they would be using that to pay down their debt as well as improve working capital. Now, the flip side of that is that we've got $12 billion going into the farm economy, and not a lot of that will go to new investment in operations. Only about 4% of those surveyed producers indicated that they would like to make or increase their machinery purchases this year. This also, producer sentiment also depends a lot on if you ask the crop guys or if you ask the livestock guys, which, as I just talked about, it's kind of a different situation for each of them. Also, there's been a lot of trade uncertainty lately. The Liberation Day tariffs, or the tariffs that were implemented last April under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, were declared illegal by the Supreme Court. So the status of those, any refunds, any trade deals made to avoid those tariffs is still kind of up in the air at this point. We do see a blanket 10% tariffs that were put on all goods coming into the U.S. under a different authority. That authority allows the administration to have tariffs for 150 days. After that, it would need congressional approval. So that deadline is coming up at the end of July. So we have some uncertainty of where that'll go after that deadline. Two bright spots and two opportunities for American agriculture coming up is the joint review of the U.S., Mexico, Canada, or USMCA agreement is going to begin this summer. Mexico and Canada are some of our largest ag trading partners, as well as the trade talks with China that have been rescheduled or are now scheduled, I think, for May. So both of these are opportunities to help, lock in some deals with our largest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, as well as with China, hopefully helping out soybean farmers as well. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Yeah, Rebecca, going back to page 12 on the direct government payments, we look at the ARC and the PLC payments is going to make up a pretty significant part of the income come next fall. I know the big, beautiful bill enhanced those payments considerably, and they're not calculated, I think, until the end of the subsequent marketing year, which I think is around the 1st of August. You have any idea how much on both, since corn beans make up a significant part of our portfolio, how much those ARC payments per bushel would be?
Off the top of my head, I don't have a number specifically. I can look that up and get back to you. I do know that those payments are expected to be significantly higher than they were last year, especially as you mentioned, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act increased reference prices as well as adding base acres. So there are a couple different methods for where we're going to see those increases coming from.
Yeah, it's the reference price, and it's a great concept, but it's a year later coming in. But those low prices that we had in 2025, I have a feeling that you look at the enhanced price and add it to the average price, it'll probably put it above cost of production and will be a nice infusion of funds come next fall. So that's a big help to budgets. I know that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Back on cattle, you talked a little bit about seeing slaughter weights increase, keeping them on feed longer. How much has that really impacted the total supply of beef? Is it significant? And is there sort of a limit to what packers are going to be able to handle and process?
Yes, that is a great question. I know I looked at this, I think, a little while ago, and it is something that we're seeing with the supply of calves being down. Beef production has been relatively stable through these first couple years of this kind of trough of the cattle cycle. How much longer we'll be able to see beef production kind of stay stable? I think we're already kind of seeing it start to slip down a little bit lower. I'm not sure how long that will last, but there is a limit, the natural limit for how big a calf can grow, how big the hanging weight that these packers are able to accommodate through their packing plants. That's the biggest limiter right now. And I think we're kind of getting started or getting close to pushing up against that limit.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. I will now turn it over to John Stevens.
Good morning, Chairman Hall and Board Member Smith. My name is John Stevens. I'm a supervisory examiner out of the Office of Examination. For today's presentation, I'm going to provide an update on the financial condition and performance of the Farm Credit System as of December 31st, 2025. I know Rebecca went into a lot of risks overall. However, as of 2025, the system reported sound financial results. System capital showed consistent growth throughout the year last year. The system's loan portfolio continued to perform well overall. Quarterly provision for loan losses consistently increased since June of 2024, so that's over about 18 months. And loan growth did slow year over year. However, the overall system health remained stable. Finally, composite FERS ratings continued to be reflective of a safe and sound farm credit system, with only 3 institutions having a composite rating of 3 or worse. Next slide, please. First, we will focus on system growth. As of December 31st, system assets totaled just over $582 billion, which was up 3.8% since the prior quarter and up 7% for 2025. System loans totaled almost $457 billion, which was up 6.5% year over year. The chart on the left here shows both the yearly percentage growth as well as the volume gains in the system portfolio since 2016. For 2025, you can see growth was slightly lower than in 2024. Economic and seasonal factors were the primary influences on loan growth. For the year, loan growth remained moderately strong, with overall year-to-date growth having slowed slightly since that 2024 timeframe. The chart to the right illustrates system loan growth in the major loan categories over the past 3 years. Collectively, these loan categories that you see on that chart represent about 97% of the entire system portfolio. Production and intermediate loans remained relatively unchanged. And one thing to note as you look at agribusiness is that a significant portion of the slowed growth continued to be in loans to cooperatives due to lower levels of seasonal financing driven by lower cash grain prices. Growth in rural infrastructure lending was slower in 2024 and 2025 compared to that huge spike that we saw in 2023. And much of the loan growth in that area continued to be in energy and the communication sector. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides are going to focus on system loan quality. While portfolio credit quality did remain sound in 2025, credit risk measures did increase. As of December 2025, non-performing assets totaled $4.7 billion, up from $3.5 billion at year-end 2024. Non-performing assets as a percentage of loans outstanding and other property owned increased to 1.03%, which was up from 0.81% a year ago. Non-accruals, which account for just over about 94% of those non-performing assets, increased to $4.3 billion at year-end. So one thing to note is that credit deterioration continued to impact certain borrowers in limited stress sectors, including tree nuts, wine and distilled beverages, and various food processing related sectors. The chart on the right shows non-accruals as a percentage of loans outstanding. And though there was a lot of stress in those specific areas, non-accruals did increase in all categories in 2025. Persistent low to negative margins in several crop sectors has reduced some producer cash flow in 2025. Next slide, please. Furthermore, loans classified less than acceptable have also increased year over year. The chart on this slide shows the percentage of loans within the portfolio classified less than acceptable by major loan category. Less than acceptable loans, just a reminder, fall into several different categories: special mention, substandard, doubtful, or loss. And they essentially have a potential or known weakness in one of the 5 credit areas that we review here at FCA. As the chart indicates here, the percentage of less than acceptable loans increased for all loan categories, apart from rural infrastructure. At a portfolio level, less than acceptable loans as a percentage of loans outstanding equaled 6%, which was up from 5.3% at December 2024. Both production and intermediate loans and agribusiness loans had the highest level of less than acceptable loans, with a volume increase to 8.3% and 10% of the loans outstanding, respectively. One thing to look at here as we look at agribusiness is that it's associated with tree fruits and tree nuts, poultry and eggs, farm supplies, wine and distillation, and marketing wholesalers. And some of the reasons for some of the downgrade or the less than acceptable loans that you see here is because of volatile demand, some price weakness, difficulty balancing supply with demand, and elevated non-feed input costs such as interest expense and labor. Next slide, please. As this slide shows, the system's portfolio is well diversified across a broad range of agricultural sectors. The chart on this slide provides a snapshot of the major commodity concentrations within the system's loan portfolio. As of year-end 2025, the system's largest commodity concentrations continued to be in cash grains at over 14%, rural infrastructure lending at over 13%, and cattle and food products both at 10% and 9% respectively. As the table on the right indicates, in the portfolio segments with the strongest loan growth year over year were cattle, which was up almost 18% year over year, poultry and eggs almost 16%, and then rural home loans, which were up over 9%. On the bottom, you can see an other line, and that's primarily made up of biofuels, primarily ethanol, agricultural services, and fish. It is important to note that although the combined portfolio for the system is well diversified, loan portfolios at any given association or any given bank will vary considerably and are much less diversified than the system as a whole. Next slide, please. I thought this was a pretty interesting graph. The Farm Credit System makes credit available in all 50 states, as well as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. The map on this slide shows those states which hold at least 1% of the system's loan volume. So anything that doesn't have a number in there has less than 1% of the total FCS volume. As the map illustrates, system loan was geographically dispersed in 2025. The 5 states that hold the highest percentage of system loan volume were California, Texas, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. California is the only state with over 10% of the portfolio loan volume as well. And interestingly, collectively, those 5 states account for over 33% of the total system portfolio. Next slide, please. The next area I wanted to discuss were system earnings, which remained relatively stable year over year, and the system reported sound financial results in the fourth quarter of 2025. Year-to-date, system earnings increased 2.3% to $7.98 billion, so just less than $8 billion compared to the same period a year ago. The red line at the bottom of this chart on the left here shows the trend in the level of provisions for credit losses. As you can see, credit provisions increased from $569 million there in 2024 up to $1.2 billion at year-end 2025. This increase was associated with some of the credit quality deterioration for that limited number of borrowers that we discussed a little bit earlier, and resulted in some specific reserves and higher modeled credit losses. The most significant year-over-year changes in earnings continued to be net interest income and loan provisions, which are the top two items there on the chart on the right. Although net interest income was up $748 million compared to a year ago, the $657 million for provisions to credit losses significantly offset that total increase in the net interest income. Next slide, please. The next area I wanted to look at was net interest spread, margin, and average earning assets. The chart on the top highlights year-over-year changes in average earning assets. As the chart indicates, average earning assets for the year-end 2025 grew 7.9%, or $39.5 billion, up to $539 billion, which is in line with the asset increase as well. Net interest spread was 1.86%. And which was essentially unchanged over 2024 to 2025. And the lowered overall spread was largely due to competitive market pressures, as this is lower than years prior to 2024. Net interest margin did decline 4 basis points, however, to 2.37% as compared to year-end 2024, and reflected lower income earned on assets funded by non-interest sources, primarily capital. Next slide, please. The next slide focuses on system capital. The system continued to maintain sound capital levels, with capital growth supported by those steady earnings that we discussed on the last slide. As of December 31st, system capital totaled $85 billion, up $6.2 billion, or 7.3% year over year. The system's capital to assets ratio increased slightly to 14.6% as well, up from 14.5% just a year ago. As noted on this slide, regulatory capital levels at all system banks and associations remain sound and continue to be well above those regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. The final slide on capital looks at capital quality as well as liquidity at the banks. On the left is a detailed look at the components of system capital at year-end 2025. You can see system capital quality is sound, with retained earnings accounting for 77% of total capital. Retained earnings is the capital component over which an institution has the most control and is most readily available to help with asset growth, capital distributions, or to absorb losses should that be the case. The chart on the right shows the liquidity position for the 4 funding banks as of year-end 2025. As the chart illustrates, that red line is the regulatory minimum for the 90 days of liquidity. Every single bank is well above that regulatory minimum at year-end, with days of liquidity coverage ranging from 147 days all the way to 180 days, so well above that line. Next slide, please. For an individual institution, composite FERS ratings represent an overall assessment of the safety and soundness of that specific institution. The chart on this slide provides a snapshot of the combined composite FERS ratings for all the Farm Credit System banks and associations. Overall, composite FERS ratings for the year-end 2025 continue to reflect the system's strong financial position. Collectively, over 95% of all banks and associations currently have a composite rating of 1 or 2, with only 3 associations having a rating of 3 or lower, compared to 2 institutions at the end of 2024. Next slide, please. Rebecca got to go over some of the very interesting risks, including all the things that are happening across the ocean. But here over on the Office of Examination, we are monitoring risks as well. Specifically, agricultural producers and system institutions have faced a difficult operating environment in 2025. Changing economic conditions and an uncertain growth outlook for both the U.S. and world economies presented substantial challenges for agriculture. Agribusiness profit margins have declined due to higher input costs as well as unstable demand. Grain producers continue to face considerable margin compression as large production levels, elevated production costs, and export uncertainties have continued to push prices lower. Though we have seen some price recoveries lately in that area. Declining net farm income and elevated interest rate environment have also have important implications for farmland and collateral valuations. And as we have already seen over this prior year, this more challenging environment for borrowers is likely to be reflected in system credit quality. That said, the system remains financially sound and has considerable risk-bearing capacity. Farm credit institutions are well positioned to meet borrower funding and liquidity needs. This concludes my part for today's presentation, and I can take any questions. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Board Member Smith?
Yes, John, I know on risks you're monitoring, your third bullet point was credit risk to agribusinesses. You look at growth, particularly in 2024, you had a pretty significant increase in the ag business loan volume, and yet it appears that the ag business sector seems to be leading all other sectors for less than acceptable loans. Is there any area of the country where you feel these ag business loans are more concentrated, or is it pretty evenly distributed throughout the country?
So what we talked about a little bit from some of the commodity issues that we've seen, especially in like tree nuts and tree fruits and those types of things, you're seeing a little bit more deterioration in some of those loans, I think, some of those accounts. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that it's highlighted or focused just in those areas, but I have seen a lot of that in those specific commodities, which in a lot of areas tend to be concentrated out west. Not a lot of tree nuts in Idaho, but there's other commodities. I would say that we're seeing it all over, slight deterioration in many areas.
When you assess the risk of an ag business loan, it's got to be a different approach, doesn't it? You don't have the collateral behind it like you would a typical farm, for instance. A lot of it's your book of business. I know you'd probably rely heavily on the income approach as far as determining the value, and when that income changes, it significantly changes the value of the asset. Is there a different means of analysis? You look at an ag business then from a risk standpoint?
From a base standpoint, we're certainly looking at all the credit factors. Obviously, as you know, the ag business is going to be quite a bit different in many ways. I think you mentioned a couple of the areas just right then. And luckily, we have a lot of experts at FCA that are able to go through and review some of those areas with a fine-tooth comb.
John, on the non-performing asset chart, showed a 6-year window, but I guess spreading it out to a more historical perspective, it's still within a normal range because it was pretty alarming how much in the last 3 years that increased. Would you agree that with historical context, is pretty well within a normal range?
I would think, yeah. So based on what I've seen at a lot of the associations that I've been to, is that we're coming down from historical high levels of credit quality. And once you hit the top, there's really only one way to go. It's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on, and something that's one of the risks that we review as we go out to these associations.
Board Member Smith always talks about it's the trends you got to watch too. So
absolutely.
Appreciate your presentation, John. Thanks for coming in and doing it. If there's no other questions, I thank you both for a very good presentation. And if there are no further questions, we will turn to the adjournment tab.
Thank you very much.
No further business to bring before the board. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second the motion. Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, Secretary, record the vote.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Hall?
Aye. Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.